Hi guys, welcome back to the Kampala Design podcast. It's been quite a while ever since we set our eyes towards the goal of opening up this. I think life happened, but we have gotten back in a big way. We are ready to provide all the necessary content. So stay tuned. So topics regarding design. In this case, we are talking design thinking. There are quite a number of other terms that you can give it: user experience design, UI UX design, product design, and other specialties within that design field, such as UX research, UX writing, UI design, and so on and so forth. We, over the time, are going to interact with quite a number of guests, as we had previously told you. And those guests will be mostly coming from the tech side. They will range from people that are within the design career path or the user experience career path, but also some guests will come from outside the design space, but in roles that always collaborate with design. Product managers, in that case, shall be welcome onto the podcast as guests. We shall have cybersecurity professionals. We shall have CEOs, especially CEOs of startups that are always directly linked to the products that they're putting out there, and so many other people. So I believe that you are going to get quite a lot of value from listening to us and also watching our videos on YouTube. We are simply here to have fun, to interact. You can interact with us in the comment section. Put in questions regarding topics that you want us to discuss, regarding anything that you think is quite unclear to you at this point in time, and we shall do our very best to try and answer you. We are going to deal with design thinking as a term at length. We shall try and unveil it. What does the concept design thinking mean? Why is it so important in the product development process? What is its role in the broader digital transformation? And what exactly is entailed in it? So the people that are going to benefit from this information are mostly, we can say, design students that still seeking clarity on the depth of design as they study it in class. We are also looking at designers that have just hit the market. Some of them, all they have to their name is probably the assignments they've had at uni or bootcamp. All they've tried to work out a few projects, sort of like test projects for them to, test their competences and abilities. So by listening or watching this episode, you'll try and get some clarity in terms of the value that is expected from you as a designer, the impact that you're supposed to make out of the designs that you make, the problems, the nature of problems that you're supposed to be solving as a designer. So it is going to be an interesting one. And I think without any further ado, let us get into why we are here today. So what is design thinking? In simple terms, design thinking is a philosophy and a set of tools that is used to provide creative solutions or a creative solution to a complex problem. They give you a brief, but that brief to an extent is a little bit vague. You're not so certain on what the problem is in its full entirety. And as such, you're very troubled at what solution you think this problem is going to have. The field where design thinking has really taken shape, I think, is in the construction field, where you have, say, an organization that wants to put out its headquarters. They want to construct a skyscraper, which is going to act as their headquarters, probably. They cannot just set money aside and at the moment it is available, they give it to the contractor and the contractor starts construction. There has to be a lot of groundwork done in terms of planning, both planning for the cost, planning for the appearance of this structure, what you usually call the artistic impression. How is it going to look? How shall the outside, this, building look like, and so on and so forth. But then there is also the concept of the structural skeleton of this building. And that is, in our term of design thinking, when you to bring it home into product development, digital product development in technology. Now the structural part of that construction or of that construction project is the user experience, because it deals mostly in how this structure is going to perform. How is it going to serve its intended occupants? Is it going to be sufficient? Is it going to be strong enough to stand on its own weight without collapsing? Is it able to contain the maximum intended loads that are going to settle into that structure? Like the people and the machinery that will be there. Are the soils on which this structure is going to sit, are they strong enough to carry the foundation of that structure, including its own weight? Because remember, the entire weight of it is distributed into that foundation. So is it strong enough, or should there be some modifications to that soil to ensure it is strong enough to sustain the building? So once all those things thought of carefully and documented and approval is given, it is until that time that the actual construction begins. The contractor is given go ahead, and the contractor then has to construct this building according to whatever specifications that were put out based on the research that was done. So in product development, it is sort of like similar. You cannot move from the client brief into production. By production, I mean the developers, coding the front and back end of this product. In most cases, you're not so sure of the brief itself. There is quite a lot of information in terms of research that is going to be needed in order for you to redefine the problem that you've been given, remove any biases that the client could have had at the time of them putting out that brief and sending it to you. And after that, quite a number of other steps will be followed, as we shall see in the later time of the video. So the other thing about design thinking is it's really human-centered. Okay, it is a human-centered approach to creative problem solving. Whatever you do within this area of design thinking has to be centered around. It has to be centered around the end user of the product that you're trying to design for. And as such, you are able to collect as much information from either the users directly through surveys, through interviews, and any other avenues You can also collect data from the market, especially from the existing either products in the market that are kind of similar to what you're trying to create. You do what we call a competitive, is it competitive? I think it's a competitor audit on those products in the market, and you gather as much information as you can from them, which obviously is intended to give you more knowledge about what you're trying to do. Okay, so design thinking takes a number of steps. They seem linear at first, but in practice they are not, as we are going to see. The first step, don't mind, because in most of the sources that you're going to read, you might find that some of these terms can change, but the meaning usually is the same. So what do you start with? You can start with, say, let me call it research, and that is where you collect as much data as you can from either secondary or primary sources. Primary sources being the researcher getting information firsthand, say through surveys, through interviews, I think, yes. And then secondary sources through their online research. For example, you go onto Google and you search products or companies that are similar to what you're trying to do. The results that you get are a consequence of that secondary research that you do. Once you're done with that stage, the research stage, you get into the define stage. After getting a lot of data, you need to synthesize it into easy to understand insights. You need to make sense of this data. You need to interpret it. And in this particular case, things such as, for example, if you've been able to collect data regarding the problems or pain points that customers face with the current product or product feature that you're trying to improve, you are able to group these problems into the most common, in case there is a certain problem that came about from any of the people that you interviewed. Almost everyone talked about it. That is a common problem. And it shows that this is a problem that really requires immediate attention, because from the pool of people that you've been able to interview, you realize almost everyone is facing that similar problem. So if you extrapolate to the wider market, those some of the problems that result into an overworked customer support department. So you give it probably high priority. You'll find that there are also some observations that you might make out of these interviews, all out of the secondary data that you'll have collected. You'll be able, as you empathize, to get to know people's motivations in probably using a certain feature more, should you try to provide a better solution to it. And that can also guide you in your coming up with a solution. So after the define stage, then you get to the ideate or ideation stage. And under this stage, you have your insights ready from the previous stage, and you're basing on those insights, including a problem that you now defined. We call it the problem statement that you defined at the end of that define stage. So here you try to ideate different solutions. You can sit together with your team, and based on everyone's understanding of the problem statement, they try to probably individually sketch out on paper what they think the solution can be. At this stage, we tend to support creativity, and as such, we do not believe so much into what people might call wrong answers. Every answer is creative. We try to understand it based on the person's knowledge, the person that brought up that solution. And we tend to encourage creativity as much as we can. For example, what another person might consider a wild idea might actually have a certain aspect that will end up in the final solution. So we encourage people to be as creative as they can, widely creative, and later on we converge and try to pass through these different drawings to seek out the most probable solutions that will then be taken onto the next stage, which is the prototype stage. Under that stage, you try to turn these designs that these design ideas that you've worked on the ideation phase, and turn them into prototypes that people can easily interact with. And those prototypes are then subjected to tests, which is our last step, where real users come in and test the workflows, or should I call it the flow path, if I'm to say work on the onboarding of a mobile banking application. You try to provide different ideas on what information should be required by the bank for a person to be logged into their account, and why that kind of information. You are able to defend it on a number of fronts. That's why this process has to be collaborative in nature, and it has to be multi-department collaboration, because you might, let's say, have a certain solution that you might consider seamless. Yes, it could be good for the user, but it could cause a vulnerability in terms of security. So if you have, let's say, cybersecurity expert on the team, they are able to point that out and then try to advise on how best you can improve that experience, or letting go of that experience altogether in favor of a more secure experience. So basically, those are the stages that you pass through in a design thinking process. And they appear linear, but in practice, like I said, they are not. You'd find that you might reach a certain stage and realize that you had insufficient information on the previous stage, and then in that case you have to go back and get the right information in order for you to proceed. You might find that at the point of testing, you realize that some of the information that you got in the initial stage, the research phase, was a little bit biased, or it wasn't. It was incomplete, or it was the wrong information. So you go back and try to do more extensive research to arrive at the real reason as to why you need to provide a design solution. So as you can see, it's a very interesting process, and it is intended to ensure that we get maximum value out of the solutions that we provide as designers. Okay. Part of the reasons as to why design thinking is good is because if you were to start constructing your house without an artistic impression, without a structural, drawing, chances are that you're going to be conflicted at the time of, construction on how the building should look. So that is the look and feel. That is the user interface on the side of product development. Then you might find that midway construction, maybe you've set up the ground floor, but as you go onto the second floor, someone advises you that should you continue laying bricks onto the first floor, which is the next floor that you're trying to construct, chances are that the building might collapse. So that means that maybe you did not put up strong columns to support the weight of that other second floor that you're going to put up. So in our case here as product developers, you realize that it would be very costly for you to stop midway your development just because there is a different, more efficient idea or solution that has come up. And then you have to stop whatever you're doing to go back and now execute on this other idea that one of your teammates has thought of. You get me? It becomes very costly to do that. But when you're still in the design phase, since you're not dealing with code, you're dealing with paper drawings, wireframes, and Figma designs. Those ones are quite easy for you to test. If this solution does not work, you easily change it to a solution that probably works. And those interchanges, yes, they can take some time on the side of the designers, but they are not as expensive as you stopping your code midway to go and execute on another concept, probably. So by you starting with design thinking, you might think that you're wasting time, but in the long run, you're actually saving time. Because by the time you're done with whatever you've produced, what will follow will simply be development based on the designs and specifications that you'll be given from the design team. Okay? So there are, should I call them principles of a good product of design thinking? For example, if you are designing, let me again give you an example of a mobile banking application. Design thinking suggests, it doesn't actually suggest, it dictates that the final user of that particular product has to be put at the center of any decision that is to be taken in arriving at this solution. So it is user-centered. It is user-centered in an approach. And that means that the product that is the result of this design thinking process, which is a design mock-up, has to be reliable. In other words, the user must be able to interact with it with minimal friction, with minimal frustration. And that is when we know that we are not going to have a lot of calls into the customer support department, because the processes are seamless, the flows easy to understand by varying levels of technology literacy, probably, for lack of a better word. So reliability is one of the principles for a good design thinking result or product. The other one is, after reliability, we have feasibility. So if this design prototype with its mock-up screens is to go to the developers, the technology there has to be sufficient to ensure proper implementation of all these design decisions. If the developers are not able to implement on what you've designed, and maybe they compromise on quality, then the result is not going to be a good product. They'll have undermined that principle of feasibility. Then the other principle, the third one, is viability. Now, the viability principle touches on the business itself. So the company or the company management has set aside resources. Part of those resources are payments for the design team and payments for the development team, including a budget for their activities, research, software, quality assurance, and so on and so forth. So management, in setting aside this money, expects a return on that investment. So in the broader game, that design solution, if it is taken into development and an MVP is produced and launched into the market, it has to be economically viable. In other words, it must be able to bring back the investment that management did and profit over a period of time. So as a designer, you should know that your job is not to push pixels, to simply make work look good and so on, as because most of the designers that are entering into the market, that is usually what they have at the back of their minds. When you tell them that you must create impact in the work that you do, there has to be business sense in the projects that you handle. They seem not to get it. But when you expound more on the broader aspect of design thinking, you'd realize that there has to be impact. If you've developed, let's say, an onboarding feature, and before developing it, the company was having a lot of frustrations from clients that led to an astronomical number of drop-offs in a sense that someone is trying to log in, and at a certain point they get frustrated and they just abandon the experience altogether. You get me? So through your analytics department, you're able to get that data and realize that on this particular feature, we've been having close to 40% as the drop-off rate. What improvements can we make to the onboarding experience to ensure that it is a little bit easier, or it is easier for people trying to log in to actually log in? So if after that improvement is launched into the market, the drop-off rate reduces from, let's say, 40% to 5%, then that is the impact of your design decisions. So it's not more about how beautiful the onboarding screens are, but rather how easy and obvious it is to the people that are interacting with your application through those screens. If the experience is seamless, you're not going to get a lot of calls. There's going to be a shift, a positive shift in the number of people that are going to now apply to get onto the application, which ultimately will mean more revenue. So that is how you measure impact of your design decisions of a particular project. So I think that is quite enough for today regarding design thinking. We shall continue having a discussion about it, and maybe next time we can talk about the overall impact of design thinking in a digital transformation endeavor. That is quite an interesting topic that I think I will have to talk about in the next video. So thank you so much for listening to us, those that have been able to watch us on our channel here on YouTube. Please endeavor to subscribe. Those that are listening to us on the various podcast platforms, please follow us. It will do us very, very well. And we are seeking to grow our community by having meaningful conversations and engagements with you. And we hope that with your help, we can be able to grow this community further. So thank you so much for being part of this video. See you in the next video. Bye.